What's up everybody, my name is Carl, and today I've got some catching up to do on several film reviews. There's been quite a few new films I've seen in cinema and online that I haven't yet reviewed. Not because all of them were bad, it's just I haven't got too many things to say about them to make them into their own videos. Which is why I'd like to talk about them all in this video. What I will say is that these films have been a mixture of good, average and bad, but overall it's been fun to watch a load of new films. So in no particular order, let's begin, starting with John Wick, Chapter 4. Directed by Chad Stahelski, this follows on from the third installment where John uncovers a path to defeating the High Table. However, in order to earn his freedom, Wick must face off against a new enemy with powerful alliances across the globe, as well as old friends who've now become foes. Overall, this film was epic. It really felt like a mega conclusion to this franchise. Even though they greenlit a fifth film, which I guess will be interesting, especially with how this film ended. The fight sequences were dialed up a lot, and not to mention the sheer level of brutal kills. There were plenty of sequences I enjoyed, especially the whole battle at the Osaka Continental, John facing Killer in Germany, as well as the climax of the film in France. One visual detail that I absolutely love about this film is the camera shot in the abandoned house in Paris. It's a long take and it's entirely shot from a bird's eye view looking down as you see all the action unfold. I'm giving John Wick Chapter 4 a solid 9 out of 10. It's not my favourite Wick film, that would go to 3, which I'd give a 9.5 out of 10. I think Chapter 4 would have been a fitting conclusion to this franchise. I definitely felt how lengthy this film is, so perhaps they could have trimmed down some sequences as it dragged out the pacing slightly. But overall it was a fun, wild, action-packed film that did not disappoint. Curious to see what they do next. Moving on to the next film I'm going to review, which is Missing. Directed by Nicholas D. Johnson and Will Merrick, this follows June, a young woman who discovers that her mother has gone missing after not returning back from her vacation. June decides to use all the tools available to her online to find her. Overall, this film was fantastic. Just like Searching, the predecessor of Missing, this film is shot entirely from the perspective of desktop, laptop and phone screens, as well as news broadcasts, without the use of conventional cameras. It's so creative and unique. I definitely have to say that there are more twists and turns in this film than Searching, which made for more drama and tension, but I have to admit at certain times it got a bit too much. The acting performances were fantastic, and the surprise climax big reveal was definitely unexpected. There's a lot of avenues this series or style of film could go down. It makes the thriller mystery genre feel rejuvenated. I would give Missing a solid 8.75 out of 10. Moving on to the next film I'm going to talk about, which is Scream 6. Directed by Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillett, this follows on from the fifth installment, a year after, where the remaining survivors of the Ghostface killings leave the slasher town of Woodsboro to start a fresh chapter in New York City. But unfortunately for them, the past seems to always catch up to them. Overall, I had an absolutely fun time with Scream 6. I love the idea that this is set in New York during Halloween. It makes for more tension and high stakes. I think the Ghostface kills were absolutely more brutal and savage in this than any of the films in the franchise. I thought the shrine sequence was a really cool moment in the film. It really shows a lot of nostalgic things from the previous films, showing a lot of interesting Easter eggs and references. The opening of this film was probably my favourite of the franchise. It was cool for it to be like a red herring moment where we get a brutal kill, but also a Ghostface reveal and POV from the killer. Only for it to not be that straightforward. Definitely a refreshing and interesting take. I must admit that it was sort of obvious who at least two of the killers were by the reveal, but it still made for an epic moment. I would say that the core four definitely had a bit of superhuman ability to them. I'm pretty sure Chad was stabbed more than 20 times, and yet he still survived. Overall, I'd give Scream 6 a solid 8 out of 10. It had some really fun, tense moments with some great kill sequences and shocking twists, albeit with some predictable killer reveals and superhuman main protagonists. However, I am excited to see what they have in store for the 7th film and what direction they plan on taking it. The next film I'm going to review is The Flash. Directed by Andy Muschietti, this follows our favourite speedster, Barry Allen, who attempts to save his family by trying to change the past, but this ends up creating a world without any superheroes. Barry must race for his life in order to save the future. Overall, oh dear, I had hopes this would be good, and well, I'd say the end result is just disappointing. I think Ezra Miller did a decent job of portraying Barry, a more serious and mature version who's determined to right his wrongs. I really like the moment where Barry has to accept that he has to sacrifice and accept the fate of his family for the sake of the rest of the world. It reminded me of how he was in the Snyder Cut of Justice League at the climax. I liked the way Barry's entire timeline was presented in a Coliseum environment as he runs in place like on a hamster wheel. It's definitely a unique take. For me, this film seemed to have a lot of ideas and had the makings of a good story. It was just poorly executed. The director claims that the visual effects were intentionally the way they were, but I really struggle to understand how that's supposed to be a good thing. How does a film that costs $100 million more than Across the Spider-Verse have really bad CGI? Like, I honestly can't believe a studio as big as Warner Brothers would think that's good quality. It's got to be a similar situation to how the Marvel VFX teams are treated. I'm giving The Flash a rating of 6.75 out of 10. It had something going for it. Decent performances, I really enjoyed seeing Michael Keaton return as the Batman, the ideas and interpretation of the multiverse and timeline were interesting, but just the end execution and bad visual effects really made this a disappointing watch. The next film I'm going to talk about is Fast X. Directed by Louis Leterrier, Dominic Toretto and his family are under threat as they're being targeted by a vengeful son of the drug kingpin Hernan Reyes from Fast 5. I can't believe I actually saw this in cinema. I mean, I gave it a chance, and I have to say, it wasn't as stupid as Fast 9. Nobody went into space, there were no cars versus Transformers or aliens. They sort of dialed back the ridiculousness of that aspect. There was even a drag race, which lasted a good 3 minutes. Again. But don't worry, it still is a silly film. So although they dialed it back, the insanity is still there. For example, Dom driving out of an aircraft and barely damaging his car made no sense. Not to mention he somehow manages to harpoon 2 helicopters with his car and crash them down onto the highway he's driving on. Yeah, I'm kind of not shocked by it, but still struggle to understand how that's possible.
Family.
What I will say that's good is Jason Momoa as the antagonist, Dante.
Enchanté.
He seemed to have a lot of fun with this role, giving off a sadistic Joker vibe, which I really liked. I mean, the guy was painting the toenails of some dead corpses. That's pretty weird. Overall, I'd give Fast X a 6 out of 10. It's better than Fast 9, but still manages to be ridiculous despite being tamer. There's potentially 2 more parts left of this franchise, and all I want is for one of them to be about street racing again, or for it to just end soon. Moving on to the next film I'm going to talk about, which is Oppenheimer. Directed by Christopher Nolan, this biopic follows the life of scientist J. Robert Oppenheimer and his role in the development of the atomic bomb. Overall, this film was interesting. It paints a picture of how much work went into developing the atomic bomb, the physics, the testing, and the end result, which displayed a haunting but mesmerising sequence as we see what conclusion came out of Oppenheimer's creation. If you haven't seen it yet and are expecting it to be an action-packed blockbuster filled with explosions, you are better off watching Inception or Interstellar or any of those types of films that Nolan has created. This is mostly a film about dialogue, people talking to one another, and a lot of scientific jargon. I went into the film expecting it to be more about dialogue, which is why my expectations were met. It's a biography of somebody's life and not an action flick. I'd also admit that the 3-hour runtime is felt, but I guess in the context of what this film is about, I understand it. Overall, I'd give Oppenheimer a solid 8.5 out of 10. It shows an interesting historical point in time despite the devastating impact. This film has an absolutely fantastic cast, filled with wonderful performances. The use of real practical effects for the explosion was highly appreciated, and the musical score really worked well alongside this film. The ending of this film is suspenseful. It really fills you with dread and potentially showcases a foreshadowment of our future demise. And finally, the last film I'm going to talk to you about is Blue Beetle. Directed by Manuel Soto, an alien scarab chooses Jaime Reyes to be its symbiotic host that gives the college graduate extraordinary powers from a suit of armour which allows him to become the Blue Beetle. Overall, I thought this was pretty decent. It's your generic run-of-the-mill origin story. Main protagonist gets superpowers, struggles to use them, loses somebody important / a traumatic thing happens, and has to deal with an evil, wealthy antagonist who has a weapon akin to the powers that our hero has. I think amongst all the multiversal superhero stuff that we've been getting, I honestly welcome Blue Beetle. It's kind of refreshing almost to get an origin story. Even if it's generic, it's told pretty well. I really like our main protagonist Jaime, played by Zolo, who I've seen in Cobra Kai, one of my favourite shows and also plays one of my favourite characters from that show. Jaime definitely has a lot of heart, appears to be quite humble, and definitely has great heroic traits. I really like the family dynamics and chemistry they all have. I love the design of the Blue Beetle armour. Yes, it might share some similarities to the Iron Man armour with the aesthetic and the integrated AI, but I like how organic and futuristic the Blue Beetle suit is. I like how it adapts with our main protagonist. I feel like the director and the creators of this really put a lot of thought and effort into this film. They really care about the characters and their development, as well as telling the story of a hero that I don't really have much knowledge on. Two things that I thought were kind of odd was how Rudy, who was Jaime's uncle, knew how to fly the Blue Beetle bug ship seamlessly. Like, he just gets in and flies it like it's no big deal. And also how his Nana Reyes knew how to use the Blue Beetle weapons. I was confused by that. Was there a TV show back in the day of Blue Beetle, or a film that these characters were in? I'm guessing a sequel is coming that may explain this, but yeah, thought it was kind of goofy. Overall, I'd give Blue Beetle a 7.75 out of 10. The characters were all told mostly quite well, the visual effects were great quality, we had some decent action sequences, and the villain wasn't so bad. I guess your standard generic villain. So in conclusion, those are my thoughts, ratings and opinions on these various films. At this current time, Blue Beetle was the last film I saw in cinema, and I don't think I have any plans to see anything else this year. I think a lot of the films I've seen this year have mostly been pretty good. A few duds, but overall, it's been mostly great stuff. So comment down below what your ratings and opinions are on these films, and what new films have you seen this year. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!